feels good. You know, just being creative again. It's been a while since I've done one of these, and I got a lot of content to actually put out, but I've just been taking time to actually focus on making work that one pays, two does change things for the better in the long run. At least that's what I intend to with the work I do. But it's been interesting regardless. Like, I stopped making stream of consciousness videos, sorry. You know, I think last summer it was getting too hot to record. Like, I didn't want the AC on, so the audio was terrible. Anyway, and the audio was still terrible, so, you know, got some equipment, recording quality's increased, audio quality's increased, so hopefully you guys can actually hear what I have to say over the music now. But I guess it's time to give you guys some updates. What have I been up to? Like, it really matters. Well, got a site up for GI2G. That was fun. It's version 1 of the website anyway, or like version 1.5 at this point. Version 2 will probably be out, you know, sometime late next year, but that'll be a while from now. But, you know, being a software developer, you've gotta like plan for how you're gonna migrate from platform to platform, device to device, things like that. And it'll be crazy because so far, like, I created a TikTok account for, what do you call it, GI2G. We were able to build up to 7,000 followers, which is insane. I've never seen any. Well, I've never really been big on social media, like, besides like shit posting and, like, you know, making fun of people's preconceptions. Yeah. But it's been a blast regardless, just making this thing. Like, right now, my biggest challenge is to, you know, dot my T's, cross my I's, which, yeah, exactly. As a programmer, that's exactly the type of glitch that, you know, mistakes you make that create glitches and, you know, bubbles down the creative process. So it's been all about, like, minimizing errors, making sure the system's stable from the ground up, so it doesn't have to be debugged again and again and again, and we deal with constant glitches, particularly because, you know, you're trying to run an app and keep the cost as low as possible for maintenance. But, challenges are challenges. It's worth the challenge. My next set of, I guess, big hurdles has been, you know, setting this system up. Like, I mean, like, setting up the visual backgrounds was kind of the fun part of this process. Everything else has been getting the right stuff, getting the right audio settings, playing with equipment, finding out one set of equipment isn't right for the job, but, you know, you can still use it. I was able to convert a Wi-Fi network booster into an Ethernet jack for a Raspberry Pi, so that's been a fun mini project. And now Raspberry Pi mysteriously died on me. I think I may have overclocked it by accident. But yeah, it's just been a little, like, series of projects like that. Like, the Raspberry Pi was gonna be a secondary server. I was gonna link it up with a couple others I've got lying around somewhere, and make that into a decent, like, mini compute cluster for, you know, testing app settings, testing app configurations, you know, qualities, yada yada. Oh yeah, and one of the big things I've been doing has been, I guess I'd call it like analysis of human behavior. Like I wrote a couple fun articles. I've got a bunch more articles coming that I want to like get out soon. I mean, articles, blog posts, whatever you want to call it. It's been this crazy challenge. Like, one of my favorites has been 10 Reasons You Suck at Love. That took about a month on and off, like, during my free time, which isn't really a lot, but I don't really, when I'm in a creative mode, I don't really do anything else but create, so it's like, at work on app, relax, half an hour for a meal, write for an hour or two. But the nice thing about these articles is that they're usually done in 2 weeks. That one took about a month, but that was, a month of free time, so 2 hours a day over the course of a month is, 60 hours of work on one thing. So it sounds a lot, it looks like a lot, but when you pay the time out like that, it's less. I mean, and I feel like big projects are always like that. When you can break them down into digestible pieces, you can get a lot done. But the trick is not burning out because of overusing the same nerve paths repetitively. Because your neurons on the individual level get tired of firing so often. So I mean, saying tired is a bad word for it, but it's the simplest way I can conceive of it right now. This music isn't mine, by the way. It's it's part of a list from rap prodigies that I'm very much digging right now. Thank you, Creative Commons. I hope this doesn't get taken down. He's on SoundCloud. This guy goes by The Architect. I've been loving his work. So, what to talk about? There's so much. I've got a sci-fi story I started narrating. It's kind of one of my favorite pieces, and I want to go back to it and maybe narrate it live on this platform. But it's not even a matter of time for that. It's more the creative space, because I want to go back and change the narrative a little bit. And editing a story that you recite is kind of impossible. So, I'll just have to start over. So, re-listen to it. It's about an hour or two of content, if not 3 hours at this point, of just the story. I guess the full story would be 12 hours or so. But I've read books that are 36 hours long. And that I didn't really have time for, conceiving of a 36-hour story. Though I'm a fan of epics. It's the story of, a group that crash lands on a heavy gravity world. But I don't want to give any spoilers, but they didn't really crash land on the planet itself. They're an artifact. And the slow, absorption and, acclimatization to an alien world is traumatic in a lot of ways. And, when I was going through this story, it's not my first story, but it's my first attempt at narrating a story, just as a stream of consciousness. But it's been a good trial though, because it taught me things about my own thinking that I've never forgotten. Of all the books that I've read last year or listened to, the one that I created is still the one that's stuck in my mind the most. It kind of overshadowed all my other reading or listening. What else has been up? Just more app stuff. I've revamped the museum site a little bit. their new features. It's based around the blog Love Supreme, a little matchmaking service, kind of to fix the shittiness of online dating. Like, as much as like I've used it and met great people on it, it's way too much of a time suck. This has been a project like that I very much incubated over the course of, like, the way I work on projects, right, is that I'll have the project in mind before I ever start working on it. I'll build it up to a point of like near completion, or like let's say 80%. And then once I have the 80% set in mind, I then go about building it. And then, you know, through the process of building that 80%, the last 20% comes into focus, because there are usually things that are necessitated by the medium I'm working with, the systems I'm working with, things like that. So like with this app, for instance, I'd been, you know, the way I wrote the app changes based on what platforms it'd be supported on. Like, for instance, like Microsoft systems work better for storing programs of a certain type, programming languages. Python is almost universally supported, so you can have different parts of your app stored on different platforms, like the database on one side, the front end on another, and then play the prices that way. And that's been a fun journey. Like, just, but the craziness about it is that, like, realizing the order of complexity of what you're creating also necessitates you simplify it. So, like, that was one of the joys and reasons I made the website before I released the app, even though the website is called gi2g.app, right? The app works as an app, but the website is where I'm able to, you know, test features, test color schemes, test the visualizations of what it looks like, you know, scrolling down your screen, getting different elements from their database, converting those back and forth. And it's been one of those fun journeys that, like, because it's one thing to make an app with full, like, you can do whatever you want, you can just, you know, save files however you want, you can work willy-nilly. But it's another when you're trying to make a minimalist app and you got a plethora of features and desires from, you know, clients, users, different, you know, competing courses like that. And navigating, like, creating the optimal outcome specifically for the long-term survival of something like this, because usually, like, it's not the creation of the app that kills a company or the creation of a site. It's the day-to-day of it, like the bugs building up, the system crashing, users giving bad reviews, things like that. So that's what you need to try to avoid at all costs. And when you do, but it works when the app is minimal, like when the program is minimal, when the site is minimal. Twitter, Facebook, all these things. I mean, Facebook was lucky. Like, we had a much lower tolerance, or, yeah, lower, higher, however you want to phrase it. We tolerated bullshit websites to a much higher degree, and Facebook has raised the bar for every other app that will ever come out, just because, you know, they've got an army of developers working with them, and they can make things that look amazing, but elegant in their simplicity. And that's the trick, right? Being elegantly simple but feature rich, and, you know, creating something that people can navigate through and spend time on. But it's also interesting the competing interests of, like, when I was creating the matchmaking service, right? Like, I designed it to be a dating service where your time loss is kept to a minimum. You can choose how you match with somebody, like over what parameters you match with them on, and then from there it's, the system. It's an AI I've been developing to maximize love, so to speak. I'm a intellectual masochist, you could say. So I like hard problems, and love is supposedly very hard, very complicated, difficult thing to understand, manage. You know, you say love is all we need, but like on a practical level, of course it isn't. So, like, part of the two-front assault of GI2G and I guess the matchmaking is that if you can then get people financially, if you can increase the net financial stability of the human populace while also increasing the social cohesion, just because, people aren't wasting time with shit relationships, they're avoiding them more now thanks to online dating, but there's still a whole political divide that needs to be transgressed. So that's another thing I've been working on figuring out, right? Like, making Republicans and Democrats friends again. Like, because from my observation, like, both sides have a reason for their beliefs. Like, they live different lives for the most part. Your average Republican lives in the outer states. I call them the outer states, the inner states. But it's that, convoluted in our minds where we put these states. Because the center of the world, in my mind, is kind of New York. I mean, I live there. It's the Empire State. All the hustle and bustle. But it's slowly and surely, like, being spread out across the greater American states. But as a result, you also get an ideological shift that inevitably has to happen as people change their ways of life. Like, when people aren't on top of each other anymore in cities to the same degree. One, you lose diversity, but two, you also gain a need to have weapons. Like, yes, hunting is a thing, but two, sort of things like wild hogs, wild horses, like wolves attacking your pets, coyotes attacking your pets, and farmland, like keeping chickens in your backyard and then having coyotes come after them. Like, it's things like that, like little irritations of life that necessitate protection. Not to mention even human protection against, other crazies, because it takes, 8-9 minutes for the police to come. If not 20-30 minutes, because you're out in the boonies somewhere. Like, New Yorkers are used to a 2 to 5 minute response time if you're in a nice area. Although I've seen response times of like 15 minutes, but being black has its privileges. And with it comes just a whole like slew of this ideological BS. I am not a fan of Donald Trump in the least. He's made my life far more annoying than it had to be. But he's also made my life resilient in a lot of ways, because, I was no longer under any illusions about, the nature of the polity that we lived in. Because, a lot of the time in these cities, in the outer skirts of, there I go again, outskirts, like, I've got to shift that mentality, because it's part of what creates this problem where people in the inner states feel unseen. But it'll be dealt with as long as I'm conscious of it, and we all become conscious of it, because people feel left out, they feel ignored, and they control the food. Like, America forgets that it's, and that's another thing. Like, I keep thinking of, like, my party, the people that I agree with as America, and then everybody else is, the insurrectionists, the bad people, that sort of thing. And it's partly like the news, like, hyperbolizing all this nonsense, but honestly, it's just the nature of the human mind where we want to create in and out tribes for everybody. And it's useful to a point, right? Knowing who you can trust, remembering who you can trust. And it's a mental shorthand because thinking is expensive, thinking is hard, thinking is exhausting. But thinking is also very rewarding when done productively, right? That's why we have jobs. It's to, capitalize on some of that good brain juice and get something good out of it. Though some people capitalize on it better than others because that's just the nature of Pareto distributions, people being different. And that's another thing that's been coming up a lot lately, like, particularly now that Biden's got the election. I've been hearing more and more talk for, like, weird things like eat the rich, or like seizing the wealth from the billionaire class, like as if it's cash. Like, it's not cash that people are hoarding. It's properties, it's material possessions, it's intellectual property, it's businesses, it's, like, you don't become a billionaire moving money around. You become a billionaire by owning assets. Metals, metal mines. I guess you could become a billionaire with a church or something like that, but it's usually products like Microsoft or what's his name, Carlos Slim with Telecom Network, or Dangote with cements. Like, they're producing services that help build cities, keep society running. Amazon in the time of crisis, like, really held it down. But now the workers are unionizing, and there's nothing wrong with them unionizing because, it's in their best interest to do so. And Amazon does have, exploitative practices dictated by the necessities of making as large a profit margin as possible. But the profit at any cost, ugh. It's just exhausting. Like, literally exhausting. Like, that is what happens when you have profit at any cost. You take what you can from whatever source is available. But it's been one of these challenges, right? Like, figuring out ways to get that instinct as it is, because I can't conceive of really changing humans. So the answer is to change the environment of the humans. And, like, that's a lot easier than people think. Like, COVID did it in what? a few months. All of a sudden the entire world's locked down. The human behavioral pattern changes. So, but we also do the same thing when we create new products. We increase the potential for new everything. And, that's its uses. Like, we create things that are useful, so we use them. But by increasing the probability space of potential actions, you also increase the likelihood of catastrophe. That's just what happens. Like, with GITG, for instance, I've also been working on the marketing levels of it, just because you have to if you're writing code for something like this. And you don't want to have the lag time of, okay, I've got a product created, I now have to pay, 50,000 to even get the beginnings of traction. So, I've been building up hype, anticipation. When's the album gonna drop? When's the album gonna drop? And at the same time, listening to the customer base more, finding out what people want, finding out what people need. I mean, it's the point of the site is to get people to say what they need and have others help them with it. But finding out what they need in order to be able to do that is another issue entirely. Like, what do you need to feel comfortable? Anonymity? You got that. You want a profile? It's coming. Like, walls, feeds, things like that to show what's happening. But then with all that, you still need, how do you say? Like, you still need a user base to have, a launch that's successful. Like a preset, ready to go group of people that want to see and want to grow and want to explore with the program. So, like, it's been an interesting challenge in that regard. It's you want to hit the ground running, but you also don't want to trip the moment you land. So, but it's been a joy. Oh man, how long has this been? I'm trying to keep on to a schedule as well. Alright. Still got half an hour to go. I've been terribly obsessive about keeping time. It's not been... I'm trying to distance myself from it a little bit, disabling my alarms. I've got like 12, 20 alarms, something ridiculous like that. But the challenge has been actually doing what the alarm is set for, rather than letting distractions carry me along. But today, for instance, I found this great video. I was talking about ways of changing behavior, and particularly if you're like addicted to something or trying to, change your eating habits, smoking habits, drinking habits, things like that, like, and the way you manage cravings, right? So the issue is that people say, no, don't do this, don't, yada yada yada, and then you create a stress in your mind about that thing. And there was this conversation about, like, what is the motivation for human action? Is it joy? Is it avoiding pain? Is it seeking, like, the highest hedonistic pleasures? And no, it's mainly discomfort, like mundane avoidance of discomfort. Not even like anything magnificent, like, love or joy, da da da. It's simple, like, we're still animals at the base meat level. So our animal selves, our bodies, have such an influence over our minds that most of us, kind of just choose to ignore it because it's uncomfortable thinking that you're not the master of even yourself. Like, your body calls the shots in a lot of regards, like when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you're thirsty, when you're really frustrated. But then you get into more subtle ways that your body, like, betrays you. Oh, I apologize, it's my 10 a.m. alarm. So, alright, the way your body changes you, or rather, it's even weird to say it changes you, it determines you. Right? At any given moment, you can say, oh, I want to do something, I want to go exercise, but your body's too tired for it. Like, you may want to exercise, you may have gained 20 pounds, you have every intention of exercising, you get on the machine and you just can't bring the motivation to run and pick up speed. Like, that's been an issue that I've had recently, right? Not having the motivation to work out because I've, in theory, exhausted my, attention span for difficult things on sitting in front of a screen all day. which at the beginning of this was kind of nice, just because I had a reason to, like, I could say, okay, guys, I'm not going out. I've got work to do. But now it's like, okay, guys, I'd really rather not be stuck inside, though. And I feel like everybody's like this at this moment. You can see a little bit more of my background coming in. I've been playing with some of my lighting settings. I've got a whole sort of green screen set up right now. It's been a fun little challenge in and of itself, getting the lighting and the recording space right for this. But again, I've got alarms for everything, so my lights are on alarms too. And they have their uses, of course, but obviously this hasn't been scheduled into my system yet, so we'll see how this bodes. So what else has been going on? I have missed this though. It's a little bit like therapy, but also like hanging out with friends, while also like just meditation in its way. Like verbalizing the thoughts definitely makes them clearer, makes them less of a bother. I do worry about like running out of things to say, but again, I have an infinity of experience, which is an odd thing to say, but like in reading all the books and like it's odd to say, but man, it's been one of these quotes that stuck with me, right? Like one of the most beautiful things about the modern day is that we can live lives within our lives, right? Like through escapism, through learning about different worlds, through just creating spaces for us to explore what it means to be human in different aspects, particularly with avenues like social media, like podcasts, where you can get, direct translation of experience from an expert. There's nothing like it. So it is to be human, right? Oh, which reminds me, aliens. They've been really busy lately. I found a video recently of a guy in the Bronx that saw a UFO. There were 3 lights in a triangular formation. It's still to be seen whether or not they're the same object. There's 3 separate objects, just in formation. And I doubt we'll ever find them, but even I've seen my own like UFOs over Harlem, which was a massive surprise to me. Like, other people could see it, but it did not show up on radar. Like, I checked that shit myself. Like, and it turns out that like the military radar operators are encouraged not to look into this. Like, like they're about like something ridiculous, like 20 or 2,000. I think it's 20,000, but this is like third hand that I'm passing this on to you right now, so it's really not like worth its salt just to know that there are a lot of objects in the sky and they're just being ignored for reasons that will probably be, revealed in about 5 more months, thanks to Donald Trump signing a bill to, I think it was part of the COVID response bill, right? I think 6 months from his signing, 180 days, the CIA and the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, is mandated to release all their information on unidentified flying objects. Well, they can't really say aliens, but that's the thing. The really fucked up thing about it is that they don't even use the word UFO for this. They use like some like unknown aerial phenomenon UAP or unknown technological artifact UTA, so they can use things like that to like navigate around these mandates. And it's clearly bullshit, but it's not like the grand populace can do much about it, right? But I mean, the more they try to evade, the more obvious it becomes. But the problem at large is that humanity's not ready to meet non-humans. Like, we can barely get along with each other. Like, we're about to have a civil war with ourselves over, like, I mean, I see why the ideological shifts are so bothersome, but it's a matter of scale, right? Like, living life on a human scale, or what we define as human, right? The 9 to 5, the work to produce, to feed and reproduce, and contentment until discontinuity, right? But in it, we also have joy, music, laughter, pleasure, pain, and a lot of that gets, I don't know, ignored. Even like the art we produce is, I feel, gotten, I don't want to say less beautiful, but less interested in beauty, which is understandable but feels self-destructive. Like, it's one thing to be said for finding the beauty in things that are traditionally seen as ugly, but then it's another thing entirely to become contemptuous of beauty itself. Like, and even the concept of beauty, like aesthetic pleasure, there's no real. It's one of those things that there is no fixed. There's no fixed definition of what it means to be beautiful, except for granting, pleasure on sight, on experiencing of it, right? Does it alleviate discomfort? Does it make what is intolerable placable? And that's another thing. I think that's why we strive for and aim for things that we find beautiful. Like, they ease the minor discomforts of life. Like, take our attention away from the mundanes of the day to day. It is worthwhile to pursue. I always wonder though, like, the pursuit of beauty, like, not just like physical beauty or what do you call it, ideological beauty, like spiritual, but and there's always a problem when you start talking on things that is spiritual dimension, because it's inherently uncomfortable. Like, when you've got the people on one side, oh, there is no soul, oh, there's a soul. Then you've got the whole issue of what is the soul, right? And then is it significant? And it's one of these like informational paradoxes. So, like, one thing that I've been observing lately is this idea of the soul of man, the seat of consciousness, the thing that's watching behind the eye, of being a constant moment that needs to be filled. So we have an inherent emptiness to being human, and that in and of itself is a powerful idea. Like that, like, there's nothing wrong with why you feel bored and sad and any negative emotions. Like, the act of existence is innately a negative to be able to take in the positives, which is one of those great head fucks, right? So this is another one, like like seeking positive experiences in a negative one, because you're then casting your situation as being in the negative, which it naturally is, but then you amplify it by, you know, grabbing out and essentially stating that your given moment in time is dissatisfactory. And it's been one of these like interesting journeys where in processing this, you then have to change the way you live your life, right? Because if every positive experience is now a negation, the pleasures of going to a park, the anticipation of finding a new lover, I mean, it's part of why I created the matchmaking site the way I did. Like, I'm adding a secondary level of it where, you know, you do all the normal dating site stuff. You have your profile, your pictures, things like that, videos. I even had to collect, like, what do you call it? Like, samples to train an AI system to do some moderation. Just because, you know, you can't have people putting up porn and things like that. Even though, you know, it's an over 18 application, it just changes the mood, right? Because hypersexualization is such a monkey mind trigger that it overshadows much of humans' higher thoughts. Like, it's one thing to like channel sexuality and sexual energy into creativity and, you know, just joy in general, and, you know, making someone's life better, making anything. But then it's another to like have it drag you down to like base pleasures where you use the sexuality to escape the minor discomforts by overshadowing them. And that's something I'm trying to avoid with this thing, like avoiding encouraging addiction of the application. Like, that's why I've been happy not to put ads on Museum, even though, you know, it would generate an income that way. Though I guess I should put ads on GI2G. Oh man, that's another thing I gotta decide on. But I think it's worthwhile though. At this point in time, like GI2G the site hasn't been up for, I think maybe we're pushing 5 months since I started it. August. I'd say we were up and running by September. But then, you know, the beginnings of child building an audience, all that stuff start to come in, and then the limitations of, how do you call it, promotional material. Like, it's part of what this is for. I've got a stock of footage I've shot from everybody involved, so it's a constant journey, just constantly improving. Oh man, but in it, oh, what a beautiful struggle though. Cause, right, aliens, natural disasters. Ooh, that reminds me. Recently there's been a lot of talk about Oumuamua, right? It's this extrasolar object, the fastest thing we've ever seen. Like, fastest object we've seen directly enter our solar system. So fast, in fact, that it was not gravitationally bound to our star, or could not be captured, but it accelerated on its way out from our solar system, which one is kind of a big fucking deal. I don't care who says it. It was probably accelerating inward too, which is interesting and terrifying. It's accelerating both ways, in and out. Okay. But then once you start to clock that its motion relative to ours versus relative to the entire like random motion of the stars in the galaxy. It was standing still relative to the total motion of the galaxy. But, from our perspective, we're moving. Which then reminds me of, like, things I've read and things I've seen and things I've heard about the work of people like Graham Hancock. And they talk about the cycles of the equinox, the precession of the equinox, the cycles of, these are deep time cycles, 25,000, 100,000 year cycles, like 12,000 year cycles. So, like, I think the grand cycle is 144,000 years, something ridiculous like that. I'll go back and check the numbers specifically, because even there's significance in the specificity of the numbers, but I'm not one to be, like, let's say, pedantic about figures when it's just deep time and we're in the current moment now. Right, so this is a Muamua object, right? More and more consensus is being pushed up about how it's an alien object, how it's probably alien, but has now left our solar system. So, and none of our rockets can catch up to it because it's moving ridiculously fucking fast. Right? So the question then becomes, what do we do about this information? Now, based on what I've read and heard from the talk of these cycles, we're at a point as we're entering Aquarius, the age of Aquarius, right? And there's one thing, like, the reason we have the cosmological ages is all about the precession of the equinox. We were formerly in Pisces, now we're in Aquarius. But another thing is that there's also the Indian Yuga cycles, right? Which were very similar in, let's say, conceptual field to this idea of the ages of the horoscope, but had a bent towards what actually happens, or a greater, like, common knowledge level bent of what happens during these cycles, right? And a common conception that's been happening is that we're in the Kali Yuga, the end of time. Well, time doesn't have an end, but the worst part of the Yuga cycle. The world's ended, the world's ending, things are collapsing. But that's, like, frankly not the truth. Like, for the last, let's say, 150 years, humans' population has been on an exponential climb. But then if you look further back, 1,000 years, we've been doing pretty well. Gradual increase, 10,000 years. Okay, that's when you start seeing some serious, like, numbers in like, mass death events. But the general bent has been humanity's population has been increasing over the last 10,000 years. If one civilization falls, another is there to pick up the slack in terms of global population growth. The general health of the human race has been improving. Mortality is dropping. And lifespans are increasing. Right? But then a question starts to emerge, right? What happens once we cure, like, we're within a generation of curing aging. And I mean that, like, quite literally, like, cessation of senescence. We have better medicine to increase collagen production. Even things like, like telomeres have been discovered to be not the panacea we thought they would be, just because turns out telomeres develop more because of short-lived lives. And listen to me on this one because it's a real headfuck, right? I believe it was one of the Weinstein podcasts, whatever, but what happens is that when people live shorter lives, they reproduce at younger ages, and every newborn has a long telomere. It's just what happens in gamete cells. Or at least in the gamete of women, right? Their eggs have long telomeres because they don't reproduce, and they're generated inside their mother's bodies. So your grandmother carried the eggs that would become her grandchildren. So there's a direct material tie between generations in that regard. And for men too, if you're having children when you're young, you have longer telomeres because spermatogenesis happens continuously. So what happened is that humanity developed long telomeres because of continual short lives over hundreds of thousands of years. But then the question becomes whether or not we've had, collapses in the grander scheme of society. Oh, I guess you're probably hearing the dog in the background. Maybe he's agreeing. Oh, this is a new artist, by the way. This is HD Neil. Also on SoundCloud. I haven't heard his work yet, but sounds promising so far. So yeah, telomeres, right? Extending human life. So the issue emerges then, is it the telomeres? Or is it the quality of life? Because, comparing humans to animals is kind of a dead issue in terms of, lifespan. Because, other animals don't have the capacity to create the tools that they would need to extend life. And even funnily, last year, right, I discovered a way to preserve the human body indefinitely. And it's eerily close to mummification. Eerily close. So I'll get the gist of it for you. This was for extended human stay in space, right? So you essentially want to freeze dry the person, but freeze drying also inhibits, how do I say, everything, cellular processes. And you can't really do it instantaneously because, the water in the body boils off too fast and the person explodes. So it becomes this process of increasing the blood sugar to what would normally be a murderous rate. And then you've got to prevent crystals from forming from the sugar and from ice at the same time. So it's this whole process of continuous agitation to prevent the formation of crystals within the body, which essentially boils down to you play a really, really loud sound as you're mummifying somebody and seizing all organic processes. And then it gets even crazier, right? Because then the revitalization process has to be a condensation. And you've got to prevent crystals from forming then too, because then you risk destruction, because the body is in theory then stored at below room temperature, right? I mean, negative 100 degrees. It's ridiculous, cryogenic temperatures. Just to prevent cellular processes from happening, you gotta jolt the body with electricity to keep things moving, got to get the heart pumping, all this fun stuff. But interestingly enough, the wiring of the brain is such that you can still keep it in operation, which asks a couple questions about the nature of consciousness, what does it mean to be alive, the soul, yada yada, all that good fun theological stuff that I like, that I love swimming in, right? And like it was a conspiracy video yesterday that popped up talking about this, and like I was kind of shocked at the time just because it was like, oh shit, like I'm not insane, like this is actually, well, I can't say actually, but probably happening somewhere, and the science is real, people are on it, hopefully they're making progress, but uh, it it tempts me to want to get security clearance, but at the same time, like, I know this technology is above real clearance. It's more about protecting the power that's gained by having access to this technology. So that's another thing I've been up to, right? I've been starting a series of disclosure releases on technologies that, let's say, have been swimming in my head, but more so because it just needs to be out. It's taking up too much room. I got better things to do with my time. And I'd rather have other people working on it as well. Like, a big one that I figured out a couple years back was like graphene. And I realized how like obnoxious it sounds to say that you solved something like that. But the reason I was able to was because I was doing work on how do I say, like, squaring the circle, like geometry in higher dimensions, things that one, people that are doing graphene work aren't, because they're working on two-dimensional physics. Like, they're literally trying to create something in 2 dimensions, so they're not working at the, let's say, the dimensional resolutions necessary to create something that projects the right sort of pattern that would force the atoms to behave a certain way. Because one of the big hallmarks of really top-notch, like, alien technology is seamlessness. We start seeing this a little bit in the aesthetics we see with Apple, right? You know, there's no edges, there's no like obvious start smoothness, and that's only possible when you're doing construction down at the molecular level. So you need more than just graphene to do this. You need the entirety of chemistry to be able to work with you, which creates a need for a fundamental shift in how you perceive what's happening at those scales. And like, you know, like, it's easy enough to say sound and cymatics and frequencies were all vibrations, man. But it's another thing to then have, like, because one of the reasons I don't, like, get obsessed with numbers, especially when it comes to frequencies like this, is that in retuning and recalibrating these systems, there's always a slight variance that needs to be adjusted for to get the exact result you want, even like with 3D printers, right? So one of the big things about this alien tech is that we're still on the printing level of creating objects, but they're on the manifestation level where you have an object in mind. And this is also technology that's connected directly to the mind. So it sounds woo-woo, but it is highly technological. But technology is sufficiently advanced, magic, woo-woo. So you have the object in mind, you have the complete object in mind, right? Because everything we have right now is built component by component. Whereas if you have an object built seamlessly, like out of a single piece of material that is stretched over, you can do a lot of fun things with that. Right? A good example of it would be like a balloon, for instance, right? Imagine building a balloon in a space that has no inside and just outside. You know, it's a balloon. It's an empty balloon, right? It's an empty bag. but it's been made seamlessly, so there's no gas on the inside of this empty bag. But now, the skin of this bag is highly reactive to electromagnetic waves. So then you can start stretching and pulling the outside of the skin. And then what do you get? The balloon starts to float. Because now it is lighter than air. Things like that. Negative energy creating buoyancy, creating anti-gravity effects. Low-level anti-gravity effects, but things like that are very fun and useful. The object still has its mass. And then you can do things like manipulating the way of the rotation of the object to cancel out its own its own mass by the way it curves space-time and energy within it. Because then that balloon now that's empty can be filled with energy, because the lattice of atoms is permeable to electrons and photons, because they can squeeze through the relatively giant size of atoms, and that's fun. But I guess that's enough for now. I can go deeper. I probably will eventually, but for now I gotta rest off. It's been good though. I like this. Probably start doing it more often. See you soon.